Industry in India today is at a crossroads. As it enters its next phase of expansion in an open market, its negotiations are not just with a government bound by the web of politics, but also with a society that is becoming increasingly assertive about rights and wrongs. Hello and welcome to the Ministers of Change. I'm Shireen Bhan. This week on the show, we examine Maharashtra's industrial policy and ask if the state is indeed losing the top spot.
The growth in Maharashtra has been a bit of a mixed bag.
I think Maharashtra is going through its own challenges, but they know how to deal with it.
We try and understand how delays in commissioning mega infrastructure and power projects are hurting growth in the state.
What we really need is leadership to continuously be interactive and positive.
And we examine the role of business in agriculture.
You have so many vested interests that the trader lobby is so strong that ultimately the farmer becomes almost like, you can say, a political football.
Popularly known as the Detroit of India, Maharashtra accounts for nearly 33% of the country's output of automobiles. The Pune, Nasik and Nagpur auto clusters are home to some of India's biggest automakers like Tata Motors, Bajaj Auto, Mahindra and auto ancillary major Bharat Forge. The biggest amongst these is the Pune-Chakan-Talegaon cluster, which has attracted some very prestigious investments from global auto firms like General Motors, Volkswagen, Fiat, Skoda and Mercedes. And while most of the investment has taken place over the years due to good infrastructure on the ground, in recent years it's been driven by tax incentives. But auto companies are now crying foul as the government has changed the rules for VAT set-off, leading to a deferment of refunds. Expectedly, a palpable unease has set in.
I was personally negotiating for Mahindra at that time. It was very clear to us that without the deal that was sort of supposedly given to us, there was no way we could have come into Maharashtra because many other states were so much more competitive. That's not the only factor that goes into making the decision. That's a very important factor because it's a huge amount of money that is involved here, and therefore if this sort of was not offered to us at that time, there was no question of us coming into Maharashtra. Right now we are working with the state government. There's a lot of consultation happening, and we are quite confident that very soon the state government will come up with a solution that will be acceptable to the government as well as to the industry. And we hope that happens fairly quickly because it's been more than 3 months now that this rule has been in effect, and it is having very anxiety for us.
And almost as if on cue, Ford and Peugeot signed MOUs with the Gujarat government last month to invest 4,000 crore rupees each. Maruti Suzuki is also likely to sign a deal with the Gujarat government soon. And while it may be a bit of an exaggeration to call it an exodus just yet, the Maharashtra government maintains it's all a matter of perception.
There may be one or two stray cases might be taking place. Their first investment decisions, if it is other than the Maharashtra, they always come back to Maharashtra. For example, the Bridgestone. The first investment facility of the Bridgestone, which is one of the biggest Japanese tire manufacturer company, was not in Maharashtra. It was in some other state in India. And then, when they wanted to make further expansion, more than 3 times of their existing facility at that point of time, just 2 years back, then they came to Maharashtra. The General Motors is one of the biggest auto giants of the world. The first facility was not in this state. But when the expansion of their facility took place in India, then again it came to Maharashtra.
If one were to look at just the numbers, the government does have a point. For instance, Maharashtra was the single largest recipient of FDI in the last year at about 35%. From April 2011 to now, 1,11,000 crore rupees in investments have been approved. This is much more than any other state. But big business has a different story to tell.
Well, business people are economic animals. They will go where you get efficiency, where you get the difference in the arbitrage between costs and your revenues. They're going to go wherever that is afforded. So it's very depressing, but a couple of months ago, I think some auto component people, in fact, actually said that they are finding it cheaper to go out to places like Vietnam to set up factories for auto components for supply into India. I think that one statement sums up the problem here. It sums up the problem of labor, it sums up the problem of infrastructure, of responsive government.
A government is not taking any decision, reforms are not happening. There is a great uncertainty, there is political instability. So I think in this atmosphere, it is difficult to do business in India, and not many, but a few do find it easier to do business abroad. We have a plant in China, and it was much easier to set it up there.
A story of delays and poor execution.
The potential is tremendous. Whether the potential will be realized or not will depend on whether Maharashtra brings in innovative, reform-oriented policies and whether they can take quick decisions. To my mind, decision-making is rather slow in the state.
And the administration is slowly waking up to the reality of increasing competition. In the last year, MIDC has launched not only an e-biz portal to create a single window for clearances and facility to track investments, it's also circulating Maha Connect. That's a newsletter outlining new projects and initiatives. The administration now has plans to launch an investor aftercare service as well. But these moves will be helpful only if executed well, and execution has of late been a sore point with the state.
Take for instance the pace at which infrastructure projects have come up in the state. For instance, this multimodal international cargo hub and airport at Nagpur, first on the drawing board in 2002, is just beginning to become functional. A study by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation in 2009 found Maharashtra topped the list of states with projects running behind schedule.
It's true not only of the governments, not only of Maharashtra, but also private industry. Cost and time overrun seems to be the ruining many of the industries of today also. Even in the construction industry, which I form part of, there are delays which are far beyond imagination. The escalations in cost is also creating a rueful day in terms of it. But in the term of public sector projects, I think it's quite disastrous. The cost which we are paying today because these projects did not come up is actually unimaginable. In many of the projects, it's almost gone 10 times. And now with the land acquisition bill, the cost of acquisition of land shooting up, you're going to find that those costs are going to escalate even further.
16 hours. That's the number of hours of load shedding in some of Maharashtra's rural districts, and also the number of hours of weekly power cuts to industry. And while the immediate crisis might be due to coal shortages across the country, Maharashtra's tryst with power for the last decade has been an unsuccessful one, marked by the failure of the much-touted Dabhol power plant, a project in public-private partnership mode between Enron and the government. In 2001-2002, the peak demand for power was 10,119 megawatts and the deficit was about 1,000 megawatts. In 2010-11, peak demand has risen to 16,615 megawatts and the deficit has spiked to over 5,500 megawatts. But the state has ambitious targets now. It wants to be free of load shedding by 2012.
The goal of the Maharashtra government is actually to be power surplus, and it is in light of that I think there are a lot of the mega power projects which are in different stages, and I suppose only once those power projects take place and actually go operational that you would find that abundance or availability of power. Mihan, that as an hub which is coming up is actually supposed to have its own captive power plant. Similarly, around Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, I think if you look at the planning that is happening is intending to make sure that there is adequate availability of power as well.
But questions about distribution of power and usage remain.
This is a big grievance of ours, especially power. We think about roads and things first, but the first basic thing is to provide light for at least 16 hours a day. Okay, don't give it to us for 8 hours a day, but for 16 hours, give us good, clean voltage power. And that is something that Maharashtra has completely failed at. In our farms, we barely get 6 or 7 hours of power every day. And that is a huge cost for a farmer to run a diesel genset. And it really needs to be taken up on a war footing, and nothing seems to be happening about it.
In 2005, Maharashtra became one of the few states to do away with free power to farmers. But subsidies up to 75% remain, and like elsewhere in the country, all issues related to agriculture continue to be dominated by the politics of the ballot.
This year's state budget put forward the Krishi Sanjeevani Yojana, a scheme in which the government plans to waive about 3,000 crore rupees of interest and late fee on electricity bills owed by 22 lakh farmers in the state. Now, while some sections might see this as a welcome move, the question that needs to be asked is, are these measures really addressing systemic problems, or is this just a quick fix solution? Coming up next on the Ministers of Change, we look at how industrial development in Maharashtra could perhaps be more distributive and re-examine the role of business in agriculture.